What's up guys, and welcome to my review of The Flash Season 5 Episode 16, otherwise entitled Failure is an Orphan. And I apologise for the slightly different format of this video, going back to the old style just for this time. I just don't have the ability to get my camera up and working today, unfortunately, so we are back to this old style. But with all that out of the way, let's jump into the review. So this episode has been pushed as the episode where Barry finally defeats Cicada. This is the big day that it's all been building up to, and Nora has pushed this idea to Barry saying, this is the day you stop Cicada, you need to do it today, otherwise we won't get another shot at it. So it's kind of a race against time. It's kind of an episode where we have to really move quickly to get things done so we can stop Cicada. Do we stop him? Well, kind of. First off though, I want to talk about Joe and Cecile and their story in this episode. We have Joe and Cecile who are investigating the doctor who's been helping Cicada, and what I really like about this is that last episode, Joe literally realized straight away that Cicada is getting help from somebody, because there's no way he can treat those injuries and keep doing what he's doing if he's not being patched up by somebody, and he noticed that as soon as he got back into Central City. So I like the fact that he is immediately on the tail, and he does eventually get onto this doctor who we've seen a couple of times this season, and him and Cecile are interviewing them, and this leads to a bit of conflict between Joe and Cecile, as Joe wants to do it the typical way where he goes and trusts his gut as the good detective that he is, but Cecile obviously has mind reading powers, which makes that a bit irrelevant and a bit difficult. So they have a bit of conflict. In the end, they do have a bit of a compromise where Joe realizes that he could really use that and actually could use that for his benefit, and then Joe can basically seal the deal. So, you know, all this was good. I like seeing Joe back in action. It's always good to have Joe back on the show. Obviously, I really missed him, so it's good to have him back. So I'm happy with all this. It was just a bit weird just having like Cecile have this bit freak out in the middle of it, which seemed very out of character for her. So I wasn't too big of a fan of that, but the storyline overall, what I appreciated was, although it was a side story, it was still tied into the main story, and that was really interesting for me. Also, we do see Eobard Thawne again in this episode. We see that he has basically discovered that there is a new timeline trying to break through. So all these events that are happening in our current timeline right now, because of Nora being back there and all these different things, are causing a new timeline to break through. So something is trying to break through, and Eobard also says potentially someone is trying to break through. So who could that someone be? Well, it's pretty obvious at this point, given the fact we are being introduced to him in episode 18, that this is going to be Godspeed. So could we see the first appearance of Godspeed next episode? Potentially. I'll say a bit more on that a bit later in the review, but, you know, it seems like Eobard Thawne is definitely hinting towards Godspeed, and also his timer is, like, below 20 minutes now. So we still don't know what that timer is, but it's still going on, and it's even lower than when we first last seen it. So when it came to stopping Cicada, I thought all this was going to be a bit anticlimactic, because I just didn't believe that Cicada was going to be stopped in this episode. I just didn't believe it, and while I was kind of wrong, I was also kind of right. I think that Cicada has been a really boring, uninteresting, dull villain for The Flash, and if your superhero show or movie has an incredibly boring villain, it's just not going to be as investing, because a hero is only as good as its villain. And, you know, in this case, you know, The Flash has had some great villains over the years, you know, Reverse Flash, Zoom, I'd even say Savitar to some extent, and the Thinker was pretty interesting, although not the best well executed. It was still an interesting concept, especially in the early part of Season 4, but Cicada has just never been interesting to me. Even when he was first rumoured to be the villain, I was not interested in this character, and he's still continuing just to be this boring, just incredibly over-the-top character who, for some reason, Chris Klein just feels the need to put this voice on. I don't know why. It just seems incredibly forced and weird. And in this case, in this episode, it still happens like that. There's even a scene when Cicada is unmasked in front of everybody at Star Labs, and he literally continues to talk like that when he's not even in Cicada. I don't even understand why that is. I don't know if that's a direction choice. I don't know if that's Chris Klein. It's so forced. It's so silly, and it makes him seem so unhuman. And it was just really weird. And in terms of stopping Cicada, although I was happy that this was kind of moving into action, where this ends up, although I'm definitely interested where this is going to go, it still seems a bit of a strange choice for me. So Barry gets this idea in his head that he realizes that he needs to actually speak to Cicada and reason with him to get him to take the cure. Because we do find out in this episode, well, we kind of knew this before, but the characters find out that Grace is a metahuman, so he basically has to go and speak to Cicada and say, look, you want to murder all metahumans to make the world a better place for your niece. You know, does that also apply to her because she's also a metahuman? So basically what Barry's trying to do is he's trying to convince Cicada to take the cure and then give Grace the cure instead of, you know, continuing to go on this rampage and wants to leave a good legacy instead of a bad legacy. This was okay, and I actually quite like the fact that Nora had this conversation with Barry, you know, where she kind of rattled off all these famous speeches that the Flash has done in the past to different villains, like Captain Cold and things like that. I really liked that. Yeah, some people have complained about it, but I actually thought it was pretty cool. So to see that and then actually go into action, because what I really liked in this episode as well is that we actually had a scene with Barry and Cicada where they're both unmasked. We've not had that, and I think that's been a big problem with Cicada, is that he's not had a personal connection to the characters at all. He's just been this, you know, menacing threat that's been going around the city. And we've never had, you know, a personal connection where we've seen Barry Allen go up against Orland Dwyer. We've never seen that this season. You know, because even last season, you know, say what you want about Clifford DeVoe, but, you know, very early on in Season 4, we had scenes between Barry Allen and DeVoe. Very, very early on. So we always had that personal connection. Obviously, Barry and Savitar, similar thing. Barry and Zoom, Barry and Reverse Flash, obviously. It was a very, very similar thing. So you know, the fact that we've never had that, I think, has been one of the reasons why Cicada has not been as interesting, is because he just hasn't had that connection to the characters. And I think with that, actually having these scenes were really, really nice. So eventually, after he tells Orland that his daughter, or that his niece is a metahuman, and he allows him to take the cure, Orland basically says, okay, I need to take the cure first, and then I'll give it to Grace, because I need to make sure it's, you know, all fine. And, you know, basically Orland saying that he'd rather die than obviously give it to Grace to risk her life, obviously. So this was all fine, and then he basically brings up the idea of, oh yeah, I don't want any of you basically strangers fixing me and patching me up. I want the doctor. So they bring the doctor back in, and she ends up operating on Cicada. Now, Cicada does actually take the cure, and it does work. The dagger and his connection to the dagger is actually removed, and Barry is able to get his powers back, which means that obviously he's no longer affected by said dagger. And I like the fact that this was actually a way of doing it, because now the doctor is trying to patch him up, and eventually all the power goes out. They can't patch him up, so Killer Frost basically has to come out and just freeze over the wound. But his wounds are healing. Cicada's wounds are healing, and he has lost his powers, it seems. So I mean, maybe there are still some remnants of his powers that we could see come back in the next few episodes, but it definitely seems like his powers are at least subdued quite a fair bit. And I like the fact that this is actually happening, that we are kind of moving the Orland Dwyer storyline along finally and kind of getting him out. But obviously all the power goes out, and then we get an unexpected visitor. So while we have Orland Dwyer on a hospital bed trying to be taken out of Star Labs, we have Cicada break through the wall of the like lounge area of Star Labs, attack Nora, Iris, oh no, it's Nora, Cecile, and I think it was Sherlock. And immediately when I saw this character, obviously it's supposed to be this big moment, like, oh well, Cicada's on a hospital bed, so how is this Cicada? It was so obvious that this was Grace, because like, if you'd seen the episode that we got, you know, a few weeks ago, I think it was episode 12, when we saw, like, the older Grace, that was an obvious foreshadow. The costume that she was wearing was slightly different to the one Cicada wears, so I could see that that was the one that Grace wore back in that episode, so I knew this was Grace. It was really obvious to me, but I could see why some people were, like, really confused by that. But yeah, we have this new version of Cicada now, who comes in, and to be honest, she's kind of badass. Like, she comes in, she's blocking all these powers. Like, that was a really cool fight scene, actually, where we have all of Team Flash in Star Labs taking on this new Cicada, and, you know, she's just blocking all these different powers, like blocking the Ice Blast from Killer Frost, blocking Vibe Blast from Cisco, even blocking Lightning Bolts from Barry, like, all these different things that she was just blocking with the dagger. And she actually has 2 daggers as well, unlike Cicada, who had 1, she has 2. This was really cool. And I actually really, really liked that. And then obviously at the end of the episode, she eventually kills the Doctor and takes Cicada back to a location. And she basically says, you know, you're safe now, Uncle Orland, just to kind of confirm to the audience that this is Grace. So, you know, this was a pretty cool introduction for the villain, just to kind of bring her in and just do this really awesome stuff. Also, we've never had a female big bad before, so it's going to be really awesome to have a female big bad on The Flash. I mean, obviously we had Marlize last season, but she wasn't the big bad. Obviously that was DeVoe, and she did turn against DeVoe in the end, so it's really nice actually to think that we actually have a female big bad going forward for the rest of the season. Even though she hasn't been the big bad the whole season, it's still going to be pretty cool to have her for however long she's going to be on the show, which I think will be to the end of the season, so that's going to be really, really awesome. But how is she back in our time? Because obviously this is Grace from the future. This is a sort of 20, you know, late 20s year old Grace. So how is she back in our time when Grace in our time is, you know, like a little girl? Well, in the promo for next week's episode, we do see a time sphere. Now, a time sphere has showed up in The Flash Season 1 and also in Legends of Tomorrow Season 2. It's basically a little capsule that somebody could travel in order to travel through time safely if they're not a speedster. So basically, you know, Damien Dark used one in Legends, Eobard Thorn used one in The Flash. It's basically like a little capsule that someone can sit in order to travel through space and time safely, but the only way that these time spheres work is that you need a speedster to actually help, you know, it get through the time stream. So, you know, you can't, the time sphere doesn't actually have any powers in of itself. It's literally, like I say, just a little capsule for somebody to sit in. You actually need a speedster to get it going. So like in The Flash Season 1, it was Barry who activated it. In Legends, it was Eobard Thorn who did it. So you need somebody to actually activate it. So who helped her? Because obviously if she got in a time sphere and came back to our time, then that means somebody, another speedster, must have helped her get to it. Now, I said I'd bring up Godspeed again. I feel like this has got to be the case. I feel like this has got to be Godspeed because, you know, in regards to speedsters in the future, the only ones we know about really are Nora and Godspeed. And it can't be Eobard Thorn because obviously he's in prison. So, you know, it's got to be Godspeed. And given the fact we're going to be introduced to Godspeed in episode 18, and we may potentially get a tease of him in episode 17, which is this very episode, it could be the case that it was Godspeed who basically gave her the push to get back to our time. So, you know, there is definitely another speedster who is helping her, unless Nora is double-crossing them. Again, who knows? Maybe it's Eobard, maybe he's double-crossing Nora. It's obviously, it's difficult. There are basically three options for me. It's either Eobard Thorn, Nora, or Godspeed. I feel like it'd be cool to do Godspeed just to give him this little introduction to connect him to Cicada, connect him to this season, and then going forward into next season, if Godspeed does continue, then we can have that connection as well. So I feel like, you know, this is definitely how Grace got here, was through the time sphere with the help of another speedster. Overall, though, this was not a terrible episode of The Flash. I actually really enjoyed this one. I actually thought that this one actually stepped up quite a bit, especially with the Cicada storyline. I think it's because they were actually finally realizing they were wrapping up the Orland Dwyer storyline, not necessarily the Cicada storyline, but the Orland Dwyer story. Who knows what's going to happen with Orland at this point? Will we see him suit up as Cicada again? Maybe we might see, like, you know, uncle and niece Cicada team up or something like that. Who knows? But the fact that we do have all these awesome moments in this, like I say, that final fight against this new version of Cicada was absolutely incredible. I loved that. I thought that was really cool. And again, just the introduction of this new female Grace version of Cicada, I think could be a fun dynamic for the show. And giving us a female villain for the first time is going to be interesting. So I'm definitely excited about where the season is going to be going. Obviously, next episode is going to explore Grace a little bit more. And obviously, episode 18 is the long-awaited Godspeed episode. And then we're not far off the finale. So, you know, this season is kind of coming to its end, it does feel like. So, you know, even though I've not been too positive on this season, let's hope that these last two episodes are a sign of where the season is going. So thank you guys for tuning into this episode of DC Central. If you enjoyed it, make sure you like and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss an upload, and I hope to see you guys again next time.